This is the Observations Podcast for Sunday, the 26th of March, 2023. Yes, we are doing this on Sundays now. I don't know how many people have caught up with that, but I guess over time it'll just all come out in the wash. Hi, welcome back to the podcast. I am apparently conservative commentator Dale Franks.
I'm Michael Wade.
Hi, Mike.
Identified.
Hi, Michael. How are you doing today?
Good. How are you?
I'm doing well. It's weird doing this on a Sunday because...
we haven't done that in over a decade.
Yeah, it has been a while since we've done a Sunday podcast. It used to be all the time because that was the only time you could get all four of us together.
Yeah.
On a specific time. So,
of course, we used to do 3 topics, 10 minutes each, in and out, half an hour.
Yeah, that was back in the day when we did show prep.
Yeah. Well, if you could call it that.
We had our topics. I mean, I would call up Bruce on Friday, and we'd often have a longer conversation than the podcast would be about stuff that we were going to talk about. And then we just decided, what the hell, let's just talk about whatever we want to talk about for as long as we want to talk about it. And then, well, here we are.
Those were the acid test years.
But it's been probably, 10 years since we did
at least, yeah.
So, well, now we're back on Sundays. I do remember one of the things about it was if we wanted to go somewhere on a Sunday, because it's 5 p.m. for me.
Right.
It had to be a pretty early day. I had to be back here by 5 for the podcast. Friday was okay because Friday at 7 for me is not bad at all. It's just that everybody else is on the East Coast and 10 p.m. on Friday is not
ideal.
Optimal. Yeah, exactly. All right. So anyway, I'm not entirely sure what we were going to talk about tonight because, as mentioned, we don't do show prep, although I did have a couple of things. I know that you had texted me with something that you wanted to talk about. And what the hell, we'll start off with that before I get into my rants. So
sure.
Go ahead. Hit me with it.
Well, it was sort of hit me the other day. So on Wednesdays, I do this trivia thing at a local bar, with some friends. And it's typically the same guy who's, a millennial, super nice guy. But he can't pronounce a lot of the names of people or characters. He's never heard of these things. He doesn't even know. And it kind of occurred to me, and I was going over, I was like, ever since we started having kids shows on cable, all the time, that kind of replaced where we used to watch reruns. I grew up pretty cognizant of 50s and 60s culture just from watching reruns of, My Favorite Uncle and Father Knows Best and My Three Sons.
Daytime TV used to be, nothing but, reruns of Mr. Ed and My Mother the Car for some ungodly reason, right. The Addams Family, the Munsters.
Oh, yeah, absolutely.
Star
Classics.
Trek.
Batman.
Oh, yeah,
Batman. Old Adam West Batman.
Of course, I didn't realize how campy that show was when I was 8 years old. It seemed like perfectly normal television to me.
Of course, this is what happens. Good one, Batman.
Yeah, I remember a couple of years ago, it happened to be on, because here's my counter argument to you, is that a lot of this stuff is still on. I mean, it's on Nick at Night.
True.
So a lot of these old shows are still available. If you don't watch Nick at Night, I guess you wouldn't see them, but the fact is they're still there. They're still out there. And I remember a couple of years ago, I happened to turn on Batman, and I thought, hey, Batman, I haven't watched this since I was a kid. I'll sit here and watch this. And Batman and Robin were going up a building on what was obviously the camera turned sideways as they were walking. And Werner Klemperer in the uniform of a Luftwaffe colonel sticks his head out the window and goes, Batman, what are you doing here? Wait a minute.
Logan!
Why is there a Nazi colonel in Batman? And of course, it was just a shameless network cross plug for Hogan's Heroes on Batman. And wow, boy, did that take me out of whatever willing suspension of disbelief I might have been willing to put into Batman, I just went ahead and turned it to the next channel.
I just thought it was interesting when I started thinking about it, how, you know, the millennials and Gen Z just don't have the same kind of connection to our parents and grandparents generations, what they grew up with, what was entertainment for them, what was normal for them, as we did.
Here's the other problem. What we don't have is this vast backlog of 30s, 40s, and 50s movies that were also shown pretty much every day. Your local television station.
I didn't know that horror movies were something other than Abbott and Costello until I was much older.
But I mean, all that stuff local TV stations had bought this huge library of all of these movies from the 30s, 40s, and 50s. And so, just every single day it was, Doris Day, Rock Hudson, Cary Grant, all of that stuff just being played on a constant basis. So
and the old Westerns, the spaghetti Westerns.
The Looney Tunes. Cartoons every day.
Yeah.
Where, a lot of this stuff was from it was during World War II. So there was Bugs Bunny.
And they were usually these shorts that were introduced before movies in theaters or in between movies in theaters. They weren't like put on TV as like a whole separate thing. It played a specific part, like an intermission between movies or, before movies or whatever. And which is why when you look at some of those older ones, how artistic and like beautiful the landscapes are and just meticulous they are with the detail. It was, a far cry from the Flintstones, let's say.
Yeah, exactly. Well, it's kind of interesting that you bring this up because today I ran across, there's this on YouTube, there is this entire, genre of people who watch old music videos for the very first time and respond to them. One of my favorites is, rapper listens to Bohemian Rhapsody for the first time. And today it happened to be black people who are watching Stayin' Alive by the Bee Gees for the first time. This is not a song that they haven't heard because in many films that have been targeted towards black audiences, that Stayin' Alive song has been played in a lot of those movies.
And that hook has been sampled and resampled.
Exactly. The assumption was among all of these people that the Bee Gees were black.
Right.
And so the video starts, and all of a sudden there are the three Gibb brothers walking down the street, and Andy Gibb opens his mouth, but you can tell by the way that and they're all just freaking out. They just can't believe that these aren't black artists because in the context in which they've heard it before, they're black artists. And it's difficult for me, maybe because of my white privilege, and also because I'm, almost 59 years old. How do you not know that the Gibb family are basically guys from Great Britain?
From Australia, I thought.
Oh wait, is it Australia? I thought it was Great Britain. No, one of those countries where they put the U's in odor and whatever. Right. But yeah, I think we talked about this last week with that tweet that you sent me via text about this person saying there's nothing like being lectured wrongly by some Gen Zer about a historical event that I actually remember.
Right. And it seems to happen a lot now. And I think that was on my mind too. And I was thinking about just this, I'm not going to call it a sheer cutoff. And I'm not trying to assign any blame or like look for some conspiracy. It was just an observation that, as kids' TV shows and TV channels grew more ubiquitous. And look, as a parent, trust me, having kids' TV shows was fantastic, especially if you have to do work at home for any length of time.
Until about the 550th rerun of Zach and Cody's Sweet Life on.
But I
Disney.
mean, at least it kept them entertained, and they were learning something supposedly. Um, I mean, not that the old reruns we used to watch didn't do that, but the advantage that we had, I think, is that we kind of grew up understanding a little bit how our parents and our grandparents grew up, and like today's generations don't. They're the digital babies. They can't conceive of a time before computers, much less the internet or computer games. And the computer games we had in the 80s were, the ones you could play actually on your own console were pretty limited. Um, in the 90s, that sort of exploded with, I guess, Doom was like one of the first big ones. Um, and then it all started to change. And then we had these online worlds with AOL and Apple World and all that stuff. And it just, all of a sudden, it just exploded. And this is to them normal. I mean, we haven't even had really real cell phones, smartphones, but for like
2008, the iPhone.
Yeah. Okay. So yeah, about 15 years.
Yeah, and here's the weird thing about that. I was looking on Reddit this week and just going through the various communities in which I participate, and one of them had this screenshot of someone saying, "There's just nothing worse than texting someone and then they wait for like 2 or 3 hours before they text back. That is so rude." And somebody responded to him, "Hey, texting has only existed like this for like what, 10 years? When I was a kid, when you left the house, you left the house.
The house.
If someone called you, you might not get that call for, even if you had an answering machine, which by the way, no one did.
No.
You wouldn't get that message for like a whole day until you came back in the evening. You might not call for days or, depending on what you were doing, maybe weeks later.
Right.
This is all brand new, this idea that everybody has to be instantly
available
at all time. And by the way, I noticed this among my own acquaintances now, and I'm talking about people my age and older, who now get a little irked if they call me. And I guess the expectation is that I am completely tied to my phone at all times. And when that call comes in, if I don't answer, the assumption is, oh, they're just ignoring me.
Yeah. Well, it's not a bad assumption. But...
Okay, well, it may not be a bad assumption, but the fact is, my phone may be in an entirely other room. It may be turned off.
It may be charging somewhere and I'm doing something else.
It may be on silent. I mean, like here in this podcast, although I haven't done it, I am just about to silence my phone, which I forgot to do before the podcast. And I spend, anywhere from, let's say average 10 hours-ish a month doing public presentations in webinars and stuff like that, where I have to turn my phone off. At least one day a week, I'm live broadcasting for 2 hours. My phone has to be off. So if you call me on one of those days, there's an excellent chance I'm not going to see your call because my phone is completely silenced or is completely away from me. And that doesn't bother me. But apparently it bothers some people. And the weird thing about that is that it's such a new phenomenon. If this was 1975 and somebody called me and didn't answer, okay, missed them. I guess they'll call me back tomorrow or Thursday or whatever.
Well, one thing I will agree with the millennials and Gen Z about is if I text you and you immediately call me, I'm pissed. I've already set the mode of communication. Let's stick to this mode until we decide that doesn't work.
Well, look, I'm one of these people that said back when the iPhone came out, and it was very expensive, and I had, I think at the time, some sort of Nokia flip phone.
Yeah.
Whatever. And all the iPhone stuff was, look, you can text all the time and you can take pictures and you can take videos and you can be on the internet. And I distinctly remember saying to somebody that I worked with when we were discussing this, I don't want to do any of those things.
Right.
All I want to do is make a phone call, end the conversation, and get off. I literally don't want to do anything else with my phone. As it turns out, Making phone calls is literally the last thing that I want to do with my phone.
That is absolutely true. Matter of fact, I survive by text communications almost exclusively nowadays. I mean, it's so much easier than email, and it's uh, you find out when you get some. I mean, you can do that with email too, but it's just it's quick, it's short, it's fast, it's easy. You can do it as a group. I mean, it's just phenomenal. Um,
We
and
live,
I don't
we live in a different
generally
world.
like talking to people anyway.
Yeah,
So.
but we really do live in a different world than we lived in just 20 years ago.
Yeah, I mean it's like night and day. I mean, like we went from uh, couples on TV sleeping in separate beds to like now it's like do whatever you want on
To
TV.
Game of Thrones, basically.
I mean, it's and not all that's bad. I don't I don't I'm not trying to create some sort of cultural issue here. It was just an interesting observation that I mean we've got to be among the first. I mean, I know you're technically in the boomer generation, but you're an honorary Gen Xer.
Since both of my parents were boomers, it's hard for me to be a boomer too.
To be a boomer too, right? That doesn't make a whole lot of sense unless you're inbred. But the it's just we have gone through so much technological change since the late 60s when we put men on the moon. And I just everything that has happened, cable TV, cable news, 24-hour news service, home computers going from the what was it, Compaq? Was that the one you could plug into your TV? No, or was it Coleco? I can't
Coleco
remember.
had one. There was the
Yeah,
Atari,
and then
um,
there was
uh, and there was a Texas Instrument.
mhm.
There were a couple of different computers. There was
There was those old modems
TI Color
that you had
computer,
in war games where you actually set
the
the
phone,
handset of
and
your
the yeah.
phone. I mean, from black and green screen to now HD monitors. I mean, it's just incredible.
Yeah, well, but when you talk about the cultural effects of these things, I think there are
Yeah.
some negative cultural effects because I think the inability to really understand how the world lived before, well, 1990 really
Yeah.
is very much an artifact of the fact that what this technology has done has concentrated our attention on what is happening now. We have the ability to have so much information at our fingertips about what is happening now and who is saying something now. And everything in the past now seems so ephemeral. We are really drawn to the current moment. It's very much a method of fulfilling some sort of instant gratification. That's one of the things I think social media does. You know, has somebody just retweeted me? I get that dopamine hit on Twitter or Facebook or Truth Social, as the case may be. I'm not sure that does a good job of allowing us to take a long view of not only history but a long view of current affairs and how we might apply lessons of the past to them, because we just don't look into the past for those lessons.
Yeah. And to be fair, there is concerted effort to prevent that. Matter of fact, to erase all that history, erase all that past. Um, Even in the most simple way of is simply poisoning the well, that it was all horrible. These were all racist, white supremacy ways, and we just need to forget all of it. We forget that these heroes that they try to hold up today stand on the shoulders of giants, as the saying goes, and what it took to get where we are. And when you lose your, well, I mean, we do this all the time, but Rome is probably the best example of how that society, as glorious and wonderful and inventive, um, and as noble for the time as it was, can collapse when people stop to care about it and won't defend it because they literally know nothing about it.
Yeah, well, that is the danger, and people have been comparing the United States to the Roman Empire since the 1970s,
Mm-hmm.
and gosh, I wouldn't mind going back to the 1970s and living in that culture, vice the culture that we have today.
Yeah, maybe not the same policies, but yeah.
And by the way, this inability, and as you said, there is a concerted effort going on, and it's the cause of a cultural fight. All of these school board elections, the election that happened out there where you live in Virginia, what's going on in Florida. I mean, all of these activities are an outgrowth of the fact that our institutions have become corrupted by people who are pushing an agenda. And one of the primary means of pushing that agenda is, I believe, an intentional attempt to try to judge historical figures by whatever the passing standards, modern standards are for cultural enlightenment. And it's working.
Yeah.
We're saying, well, Christopher Columbus was a horrible person. Well, in the context of today, yeah, he probably was. In fact, everybody who existed in 1492, by our standards, was probably a horrible person. They lived in a horrible world, a world who was it? Thomas, I forget the poet who described life as, nasty, brutish, and short.
It wasn't a poet. It was what's his face wrote the Andromeda. No, not Jonathan Crichton. No, I'm
No, it wasn't
sorry,
Michael Crichton. No,
not Michael Crichton. No, it was uh,
yeah, I can't remember it either.
the libertarian writer who wrote "Stranger from a Strange Land."
Robert Heinlein.
Heinlein.
Yeah, maybe. I think it goes back older than that. But in any event,
Maybe he does. Maybe he was quoting somebody.
in any event, it doesn't matter because people can only be just in the context of their own time, whatever those standards might have been. And
Well, and people forget that the number one rule of moving forward is surviving to be there, and what it takes to survive in 1492, hell of a lot different than what it takes to survive in 1982, 1992, certainly in 2023. I mean, we're just worlds apart to get to the next level. And anything that advanced the ball, and that's what I think drives me so crazy is we're not learning the lessons of the past. That's bad enough. But we're not learning all the struggles that we went through to get down to this idea that individual rights are the most important, and how we arrived at those ideas, where those ideas came from, and how they filtered through history and created some of the greatest cultures, nation states, empires on earth. While never completely living up to that promise, each one of them advanced it far enough that another culture, another state could pick up the ball and keep running with it.
look,
And
but the problem goes beyond that. It's not that we have lost the ability to learn lessons from the past. We're not learning the lessons from now.
right, yeah,
I mean, all you have to do is look at COVID and see how that was handled. And, it makes you wonder, is this incompetence or is this intentional? We can go back and we can talk about the lab leak theory and how that was just some crazy conspiracy theory that literally would get you banned off of social media. Couldn't talk about it. Couldn't question remdesivir as a treatment for COVID here in the United States, despite the fact that the WHO would not approve remdesivir as a treatment for COVID because of the side effects and because of the dangers attendant to it. Okay, everywhere else in the world, the followed the WHO recommendations and said, okay, well, we won't prescribe it. Not the United States. Not only did we prescribe it, we made it mandatory. It was the only treatment allowed
Yeah, can't use
for
that
COVID.
horse paste, ivermectin.
Oh, yeah, and ivermectin all of a sudden became horse paste. And does ivermectin work? I don't know. Because
Some people apparently does.
the studies are very mixed on its work, and
Yeah.
we can make critiques of various studies, which
But there is no panacea, as we've
yeah
seen
there's no
with every disease.
yeah but there's
There
no
are certain things that work better for most people than others, but
but
I
what
mean,
we
unless you're talking about an actual vaccine, like a polio vaccine, you don't have a perfect analgesic for every single person, for every single virus or bacteria or disease.
and what we didn't get was any acknowledgement of humility at the
Yeah,
FDA or the NIH that, hey, this is the reason that we call it a novel coronavirus is because it's new. We don't know how it works. We don't really have a lot of experience with it yet. Instead, they just said, okay, this is what you have to do. Are we going to listen to clinicians and see what treatments they're coming up with? No, no, no. We're going to mandate what clinicians are allowed to do and what
yeah,
they're not allowed to do. And it became this top down Soviet style mandates of everything, whether it was vaccine mandates, which the Biden administration tried, or the remdesivir mandates, whatever it was all mandate, it was all top down, it was all directive. And there was no humility about maybe we just don't understand the situation. The old Navy adage: if you can keep your head when everyone around you is losing theirs, then maybe you just don't understand the situation. And
yeah.
and we still have people who are in charge who, well, Anthony Fauci, he still refuses to acknowledge that the lab leak theory might be possible. Of course, we'll never
Although
know now.
thankfully he's not in charge anymore.
Yeah, he's not in charge anymore, but of course, we'll never know now because the Chinese have had 3 years to cover up any evidence that might have led to it. And of course, they're not going to let anybody go in and investigate it anyway. So, it'll always be a theory. I think it was interesting that Jon Stewart finally last week or week before
Of
last,
all people, yeah.
of all people, just broke through that, and really on the late night show he was on with Stephen Colbert. Even Colbert did not want him to go off in the way that he did, and kept trying to rein him in. And Jon Stewart just wasn't having any of it.
Well, I mean, John has a little edge on Colbert, and that Colbert has no career without Jon Stewart. So.
And Jon Stewart's already had his career. He's uncancelable now.
Pretty much, yeah.
Same thing with like Elon Musk. He's just uncancelable.
Yeah, he's got fuck you money.
Yeah. So there are certain people that you can't touch, and they can say what they want. For the rest of us, there's a lot of self-censoring going on, and people will admit to it.
Yeah, it's becoming more common, actually. Not that that's going to change a lot because, you posited the question of whether it's incompetence or intentional, and I pretty much dropped the pretense that it's incompetence. Although they are also incompetent, it is definitely intentional what they're trying to do. This is all about maintaining power for the political class, not just here, but throughout the world. They are the new aristocracy, the nouveau regime as opposed to the ancien regime. They really don't care what happens to their subjects, which is how they think about it. All they care is that they retain the power and privilege to keep doing what they do on a day in and day out basis. Their favored family and friends are taken care of. Uh, you ask, well, why would we keep doing something that doesn't work? It doesn't matter if it works. It matters if it sounds good. I mean, if all that matters is if it works, then we would not be having socialism anywhere near anything. We would not have government run programs of most of the, I mean, the vast majority of the types that we have,
Yeah.
because we know they don't work.
Yeah.
It's been proven over and over again.
And yet, just this week, in fact, day before yesterday, Alex Lee, who is a state legislator here in California, wrote, "Imagine this. Withdrawing your UBI check, Universal Basic Income, withdrawing your UBI check that was seamlessly deposited in your public banking account after picking up your kids from awesome public school and then taking green transit back home to your social housing flat."
That last part is, I think, the most scariest part of it all. Your social housing flat, comrade. Whoa. Like, that's like,
I mean, this is a one sentence encapsulation of everything that half of the world had imposed on them for 70 years under the Soviet style communism, that they couldn't wait to get away from, although they've kind of gone back to communism, well, to authoritarianism without the communism. First of all, your public banking account. Well, first of all, there's your UBI check. Oh, okay.
Where's that come from?
Yeah. Yeah. Where's that coming from? Who's paying for that?
I mean, I get a universal basic income. I don't have to work.
Yeah.
Which
So
means I'm not paying any taxes, which means,
yeah. So that seems a little odd. And then your public banking account. Well, we saw last winter what government control over your banking accounts will do in Canada. And your awesome public schools. Well, I'd like to know where that public school is, because currently 40% of public school graduates are functionally illiterate. And then taking green transit. Well, we don't have the electrical generation power to have any green transit. So I guess walking would be considered green transit. And then, of course, your social housing flat, the housing that's provided to you by the government, as long as, you obey.
Yeah. Yeah. Good.
It's a vision of complete dependency on the government.
I just think of Terry Gilliam's Brazil, dystopian nightmare with the Monty Python flair to it.
Yeah.
That it almost perfectly describes how it all worked. But even there, the elite also kind of had nothing. They could get back channels to some of this stuff, like air conditioning, if you were really, high up in the government. But it was an absolute dystopia, and people were completely miserable. And this isn't far off from how places like the Soviet Union, its Eastern Bloc countries, Cuba, certainly even to this day, Venezuela,
Communist China.
I mean, we could go on and on and on, and it doesn't work. It never works. Sorry, I did the Joe Biden whisper thing there, didn't I? It doesn't work.
Come on, man.
Maybe it's a Delaware thing. But it's just, if these people wanted things that worked, if we were actually debating, between two parties, independents, and whatever, about things that actually work, what are the costs and benefits? That would be great. That would be real government. That would be a government I would want to do stuff. But we don't. What we have is one side trying to control the other side. And, they're just fighting over power of who gets the spoils. And,
all you have to do is look at the federal government's anti-poverty programs, especially as they started off in the 1960s with Lyndon Johnson and the Great Society. And we have all of these welfare programs WIC, what have you. Um, and then you go look at a graph of the percentage of people who live in poverty in the United States.
Right.
And of course, these are poverty in American terms, but it's 20% of the population today, just like it was in 1964.
Right.
Okay,
And they
that's
massage those terms
yeah,
as well.
that's 60 years of anti-poverty programs, and we have the same rate of poverty today as we had in 1964.
Right.
That should make one wonder if these programs are worth the money that we're spending on them. And yet, it never does.
There was a program, Head Start, that I think that began maybe back in the
Yeah,
80s,
it was in the
late
80s.
80s, that they thought might show some promise. It made sense. I mean, in realistic terms, it was more of state covered babysitting for the early morning hours, until like noon or so that more people could go out and work. Okay, I get it, whatever. Um, but after about 30 years of doing that, the metrics were just so awful. They couldn't show any advantage. And in fact, they found a lot of disadvantages to it. They finally ended that, sort of. Then what they did in Congress was, it's not called Head Start anymore, but they just put a new name on it, changed a few of the parameters, and then pushed it out again. And I think now it's part of like SNAP or WIC or whatever. Um, it's once they get the clause in, they won't let go. And it has nothing to do with improving anybody's lives. It's about buying votes and staying in power.
Yeah, and as long as that works, nobody's going to demand results. It reminds me of that line in Ghostbusters from Dan Aykroyd. I've worked in the private sector. They expect results. Yeah, because the public sector doesn't, and we've let them get away with basically, at best, lackluster results, and generally no results for years and years.
Right.
And yeah,
And well, and
won't do anything about it. And look, even for things that are going to be a problem, we were just talking about the baby boomers, all of whom are now in their 70s or going to be entering their 70s over the next 10 years. And we're going to have to pay for all their Social Security. How's that going to work? We currently have, what is it? Somewhere between 55 and $100 trillion in unfunded liabilities for Social Security.
Yeah.
I mean, it's like what Glenn Reynolds at Instapundit always says: promises that can't be kept won't.
Right.
Because we can't keep those promises.
Yeah, and no idea what to do about it. Just because, I mean, the money's just not there. And since we have far fewer workers for every retiree now, I mean, the calculus cannot be made to work. So somebody's going without something. It's the bottom line.
But
You almost think that,
whatever you do, don't even think about modifying Social Security.
I mean, I almost think it'd be a better option at this point to like means test it and say, okay, look, you make above this, I'll give you a one-time payment, for a tenth of the net present value of your Social Security account, and then you take that money, won't be taxed. You do whatever you want. If it gets taxed, it gets taxed. If it doesn't, it doesn't. But that's it. You're off the dole. But they won't do that because, well, actually, I don't even know if we can afford that, to be honest. But because they don't want to give up that being a what's that term? Oh, stakeholder. They like to use the term stakeholder. They don't want to give up people who are bought into the system or beholden to it and may, in fact, be dependent upon it, because that dependency gives the government power. and it doesn't actually help the people they say they're trying to help. But again, that doesn't matter to them.
Here's the thing, though. I mean, we could make Social Security solvent. I mean, the problem would be that the one thing that Americans don't want to do, we'd need European tax rates.
And even then, it would destroy, not destroy, but it would severely retard our productivity and output. Our GDP would fall dramatically, and we'd actually end up with less taxes. I mean, I know everybody tries to scoff at the Laffer curve, but there is something to it. Do we know where each point should be set? No, we don't. We don't know what the apps. Well, we've got a pretty good idea.
And it
We've talked
changes
about this
and
for
it changes
years.
over
We know
time.
that around 20% of income or of GDP is where you can fiddle with it around the margins, but you can't do a European style tax system unless you get completely rid of the income tax and we go to an all VAT or something.
Well, of course, the Europeans have both.
Well, yeah, and if we get a VAT, we would have both. So, we don't get rid of taxes in this country. Actually, no country
Yeah, no
does.
country does. That's not how this works. What are
Right?
you? What are you? Some kind of nut? You get more taxes, not less.
Right. What are you, Andrew Mellon?
Yeah, so I don't. As I've said many times, the sooner that you come to the conclusion that every major institution in our society has been corrupted, um, then things make a lot more sense.
Yeah, what's that saying that Instapundit's always a few people over there. Sometimes it's better to understand an institution as if it's owned and run by a cabal of your enemies. It's like there's something to that. Especially, the Gramscian long march through the institutions has long been laughed at. That's John Birch nonsense. That's Barry Goldwater nonsense. Um, and yet we're sitting here in the midst of it. And the very ones who instituted it are now the ones getting tossed out by their students. I mean, it's a full Mao struggle session. I mean, the youth have been armed and they've got their little red book, and they will call out the heretics wherever they see them.
Yeah, well, we've raised a generation of little Maoists, haven't we?
I mean, essentially, I mean, and I don't think that's even fair because I don't think that is the majority of either millennials or
I
Gen
don't think it's
Z.
I don't think it's a majority either, but everybody else is too busy keeping their heads down.
That, and we don't have a media that will call.
Uh-oh. Well, um, I'm not sure what happened, but it looks like Michael is gone, and so we're getting a very weird picture on screen now. So what I'm going to have to do, I think, is for the moment, I am going to turn the Zoom window off, and we will have to wait for Michael to, to reconnect on Zoom. By the way, did have somebody in chat say, I saw Dale got quoted on Instapundit this week. Yeah, that did happen. I have no idea how. And by the way, Instapundit just picked it up. It didn't start there. AOC made a dumb little speech about how the Parents' Rights Bill, which every Democrat voted against, was fascism. And I wrote, as I want to do, because I don't do a lot of deep analysis on Twitter, it's simply not a platform that's designed for it. I wrote a smart little comment that says, oh, okay, so, reducing government power to increase individual rights is fascism. Good to know. That was it. Somehow that got picked up by Fox News in a story that that put my tweet there as at the very top, conservative commentator. First of all, libertarian, not conservative, but okay. And then Instapundit picked up, and I just happened to wake up one morning, and at some point I turned on Twitter and saw basically hundreds of notifications coming off of Twitter because this thing because it got passed around. I don't know how I got picked. I don't know why, because I'm just some rando nobody on Twitter. So I don't know why I would be the one who would get picked for that. But nonetheless, it happened, and there you go. I got a little brief moment of fame. It kind of reminds me what happened, I guess, about 15 or 20 years ago. Whenever I think it was Bruce and John and John Henke, who started the Q&O blog, we were invited to these telephone Q&A sessions with Roy Blunt. Some also ran, and the guy who actually became Speaker of the House, the guy from, I can't remember his name, the guy from Ohio, heavy smoker, whatever. And Roy Blunt was just a huge ass during this whole thing. And somebody made a critical question to him, and he responded with, well, if this is the attitude you folks are going to have, then maybe you just won't get any more access to us. And that really irked me, because I'm just some nobody who was writing on a little blog at the time. And so I just wrote a little article, and in it I said I would rather lick fire ants off a stick than see Roy Blunt as the Speaker of the House, which did not happen. But somehow that got picked up, and his press person actually came out in a press conference and addressed it directly. And again, why am I being picked out as this person who quotes? Is basically just because I say smart ass things, I guess. And sometimes people like smart ass things. But anyway, that happened this week. And the question, who watches Fox? I don't know. I don't, but it wasn't actually on Fox News TV. It was on the Fox News website. So it was actually a story on the Fox News website. And then Ed Driscoll over at Instapundit included that in his little post about the AOC speech. So it went from the Fox News website to Instapundit to pretty much everywhere. Anyway, that happened this week. It doesn't really mean anything. It just happened. I don't know where Michael is, and I haven't gotten a test. My CPU sometimes just stops for no reason. I'll be back in a minute or so. Okay, well, there we go. Michael is out for a few minutes until his PC comes back. So while we're waiting for him, I will just keep talking. Trump had his rally in Waco this week. This is not the same guy who ran for president in 2016. Say whatever you want about Donald Trump. Yes, and I've said a lot of bad things about him. But at least in 2016, his campaign was largely about what he called the forgotten people in America, the workers and whatnot. And much of his campaign rhetoric centered around what to do about these people who were, working every day and not being able to get ahead, and how he was going to help fix all of that up. Now his campaign is about him, about how badly he's been treated, and about how, all these people who did such horrible things to him, they're the ones that need to pay. It's a much darker campaign than he was running in 2016. Do we need to chip in for some new equipment for Michael? Well, that's something you'll have to take up with him, I think. But in any event, Donald Trump is running what seems to me like a much more narcissistic campaign now than he ran in 2016. And one of the things he did at that Waco meeting yesterday just just astounded me because he was talking about Marco Rubio and how Marco Rubio was such a failure as governor of Florida. And then he brought up Charlie Crist and said, you know, that Charlie Crist, he was super successful. And now, look, since 2010, Charlie Crist has run for 2 statewide elective offices. Hi, Michael. Welcome back.
Sorry about that.
And Ron DeSantis has run for statewide elective office twice. So since 2010, in
3
those,
times.
Ron DeSantis has run 3 times for statewide
Well, he
elective
ran.
office.
Oh, you mean since? Never mind. Okay,
Yeah, since
go ahead.
2010, he was in Congress.
He was a representative.
Yeah, he was in Congress, not statewide.
Right.
In any event, in 2010, Charlie Crist ran for Senate as a Republican, lost. Then he came back and ran for governor as a Democrat, lost. And then this last time he came back and ran in 2018, I guess, ran for governor as a Democrat and lost. Oddly enough, to Ron DeSantis, who in his reelection campaign took 60% of the vote in Florida. So if I was just, guessing, I would guess that the voters in Florida largely disagree with Donald Trump's analysis of Charlie Crist's success and Ron DeSantis' failures. But of course, we all know the only reason why Donald Trump is trying to make Ron DeSantis a failure is because he perceives a threat from Ron DeSantis, who, by the way, is not a declared candidate.
Right. It's not just him. It's also the mainstream media who they run with this stuff against DeSantis every chance they get. They go out of their way to, magnify the Trump claims and assaults just to, get into DeSantis's grill. And it's not working. I mean, so far, he and his comms team have handled the mainstream media better than anybody.
Well, it's not just they've handled the mainstream media better than anybody. They've handled Trump better than anybody. And
yeah,
John Gabriel,
that's exactly right.
John Gabriel.
Well, but they're kind of the same thing, though, because, look, the mainstream media wants Trump to be the nominee.
Yeah, because
not just because they think he's the easiest to beat, but because he brings them ratings. He brings them unbelievable ratings. They've admitted it. They admitted it in 2016. Of course, that's who they want. That guy, and he works closely with them. He just did, and this was masterful, Trump. I will give him this. The whole Alvin Bragg thing. I'm going to be indicted and arrested on Tuesday. No, you're not. It's like it was throw me in the briar patch, like all over again. It was so freaking easy. But he managed the news cycle. He managed the DA of Manhattan. He managed the grand jury. I mean, he literally blew this whole thing up into egg on their faces because it is so obvious that this is just a witch hunt, that this is absolutely stupid. There is no legal grounds here for what they're trying to do. Matter of fact, the only legal grounds were already rejected by both the FEC and the DOJ because it was eerily similar to the John Edwards case back in, 2008, 2012? I guess it was 2008, when a bunch of his donors paid like $1 million to his mistress and baby mama to keep her quiet. He was brought up on charges, but it didn't stick. There was a similar case against the last Republican governor here in Virginia, not similar necessarily in the details, but in the type of law that was trying to be pushed for corruption. with Bob McDonald, and that lost. So there's really no legal precedence here at all. They know that, but they keep pushing it because it drives DeSantis out of the headlines. It keeps Trump in the headlines, and Trump works willingly with them on this. I mean, you got to admit, it's as far as just pure retail politicking. Trump is really good at this, as was Bill Clinton. This is actually kind of Clinton-esque in a way.
Yeah, well, under the theory that, even bad publicity is publicity, I suppose, sure.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and well, I mean, that's been Trump's motto forever.
But here's the thing. John Gabriel wrote an interesting article, and it goes back to something that you and I talked about, hell, a month ago, about how to deal with Donald Trump, and the way that DeSantis is dealing with him is basically largely ignoring him.
Yeah, and it's been the most effective means of dealing with him because, well, I loved when they asked him about the nickname. So that's Trump's way of trying to get under your skin, is with the nicknames. Little Marco. I forget what he called Jeb.
No energy Jeb or something like that.
Yeah, low energy Jeb or whatever. I mean, it's a way to get under your skin, and it kind of like we said, it's like, oh, that's a good one. That's a good one, Donald. That's exactly the approach that Ron took. He's like, yeah, I think like that. I like that Ron DeSanctimonious one the best. That's pretty good. I don't think I could spell it. I'm not sure how he's going about it there, but I think that one's kind of cool. It sounds sort of interesting.
Well, when you talk about a masterful answer from DeSantis, whenever he finally was just asked directly
exactly
by the press, what do you think about this indictment? And his answer was, well, look, I can't speak to what happens when you pay hush money to a former porn star to cover up an affair. I just don't know anything about that. I can't speak to that, okay? But this is clearly some sort of politically driven prosecution, and it's obviously not the way the justice system is supposed to work.
That was
go.
Beautiful.
You get in Alvin Bragg is just basically doing what New York prosecutors do, which is go after, politically expedient targets. And, also, you do know he had an affair with a porn star, and he paid her like $300,000 to shut her up, right?
130,000. She was a cheap porn star.
Yeah, but whatever. I thought it was 300 grand that he.
No, it was 130.
Ultimately paid her. Oh, well, anyway, more money than he's paid me to keep my mouth shut.
It was sublime in how easily it rolled off his tongue, how it was more in sorrow than in anger.
And again, that's how you have to deal with him. Just ignore him until you're forced to, and then come up with a short, witty answer that just answers the question, that says exactly what he needed to say, which was that it's a politically motivated prosecution. Because, by the way, the DOJ has had 2 cracks at this and waved it off. So,
well, I think that DeSantis, if and when, and I think I'm like 75% sure he's going to get in. If and when he does get in, the best way for him to, because here's the ace in the hole that Trump has is, these guys all push my same policies, the ones that I actually put in place and delivered on. And I did that as president. None of them have done that. I did. So, they can talk the talk, but can they walk the walk? I did. And that was despite all the, pressure against me.
Well, did he?
And essentially, DeSantis's defense to that is, look, I am forever grateful for the things that President Trump put into place. I just want to do it without stepping on my own dick every fucking 5 minutes.
Yeah. Well, see, first of all, there's a couple of things about Donald Trump running that I want to talk about. Number one is the fact that he's basically got a lock on 30% of the GOP electorate.
Mhm.
And in anything other than a two-person race, he's going to get 30%. So that means when you start walking into primaries, he's going to be getting 30%, 30%, 30%. And
Yeah.
everybody, and the other 60% is going to be split between, 5, 6, 8, however many candidates, at least at the beginning. So he already has an enormous advantage in getting the nomination simply because he's got 30% diehards
Yeah.
and nobody else does. And I think he knows that, and he thinks that that gives him, by almost any rational measure, a huge head start for the nomination. Sure. I
He's
mean,
not wrong.
he could do who? Trump?
Yeah, it's not wrong that gives him a
Oh, I thought you
huge
said Trump's
advantage.
not running. I was like, I thought you said he's
No, no,
not
no.
running.
I'm saying
He's not
he's
wrong.
not wrong. Yeah.
Yeah, so there is that. And what's really interesting, I find, is that that 30% is unwilling to examine Donald Trump's actual record. Donald Trump gets up there and says, when I go back, I'm going to get rid of this deep state. Why didn't you do it in your first term? I mean, if you couldn't do it then, why do we think you're going to do it now? All these things that he says he's going to do. He already had 4 years to do them and didn't. So why would we believe that he could do them now? And look, I'm not sure that anybody else can do it either.
But DeSantis seems to have a better chance because he has deeper ties to politicos than Trump ever did. So he's also been through the process of vetting his political insiders. So he does have an advantage there of getting personnel in place who he can trust, who he can work with. Now, on the flip side, that's the thing that bothers that 30% is they're very worried about. I mean, let's face it, the number one thing that people liked about Trump, people who wouldn't have voted Republican, who didn't vote, but who came out in droves for Trump, was that he wasn't tied to either establishment. He was a complete outsider. He was not going to get bogged down with the swamp, which is true on a surface level. But in order to get anything actually done, you actually need people inside that system. You have to have managers and wranglers inside the system, shedding the dead weight, changing the policies, and enforcing those change policies. And Trump never really had that. DeSantis, I think, would have a better shot at it. I don't know how much better, but I think he would have a better shot at it. But the worry amongst the more populist people is that he'll end up selling his soul to the swamp, just like everybody else. And I don't really begrudge him that worry.
Yeah, well, I mean, if I was guessing right now, and obviously we're a year out from the primaries, so any guess is worthless. But if I was guessing right now, I would guess that Donald Trump has an excellent chance of being the nominee.
Right now, all the polls show that he's ahead, and that's including with DeSantis in the calculus.
Yeah, his voters.
Now, DeSantis has also not made any real push.
Yeah, his voters are committed, and they will show up at primaries and they will vote. And so, even if he only has 30% of the GOP, if they're the 30% that shows up on primary day, then he gets more than 30% of the primary vote. Right?
And we've already seen that he gets people motivated for primaries for those, those big days. So I think he has an absolutely at least motivational advantage. I don't know if he has an organizational advantage.
No, I don't think he has any organization at all.
Yeah, I think that's going to end up being a problem for him down the road. The guy is super motivational. He really does. And I'll be honest, he hits the right issues when he's not like,
Yeah,
just
well,
harshing on his
yeah, except
opponent.
he is increasingly not talking about those issues. He's increasingly
I
talking
agree.
about
Yeah, that's
himself.
right.
He's increasingly talking about how he's been victimized and how
Right.
I know the message. I know the dots that we're supposed to connect. If they can do it to me, they can do it to you. And
Hmm.
so, you have to elect
And that's
me.
not
So,
wrong, but that's not the big concern. This shouldn't be a Donald Trump vindication election. It should be Donald Trump is the right
and
person
by the
for
way, it
the
won't.
job.
If Donald Trump runs for president again, he'll lose.
I think that's well, if he runs on the message that he's carrying so far, yes, I agree.
He'll
And that
lose.
doesn't even matter if Joe is the one or not.
No. And I'm not entirely sure that that isn't the outcome we should not want to see.
I, yeah, I don't know. I want them both to disappear from the scene.
Yeah, I
And
think
the
the
problem is if Alvin Bragg succeeds in getting an indictment and then trying to push that through, or the many others who are trying to. There's one in Georgia that's trying to do so. Um, I think there's one in D.C. If they succeed in doing this, they turn him into a martyr, and a lot more people are going to show up for Trump. It might make the race a lot closer at the presidential level, especially given slow Joe Biden. Um, but I don't think it can be enough to push it past the margin of fraud. And unfortunately, that's the margin that we're dealing with now.
well, without commenting on the fraud comment, um, I'll just look at 2022. Trump's candidates just didn't make it. I mean, they did in strongly Trump places, but no place that races were contestable did his candidates win. And candidates that he didn't like, Brian Kemp, for example, in Georgia, did very, very well. Um,
Yeah, Kemp's being compared to DeSantis in the way that he squeaked out a win, obviously against Stacey Abrams, but then just cakewalked.
yeah, and look, we can look at Mike DeWine in Ohio. I don't think he's interested in running for president at the moment. I could be wrong. But not a Trump guy either. And he did
No,
well. And I would suspect that he carried J.D. Vance across the finish line on that one.
it's possible. It's hard to tell. I mean, I don't really want to get into the whole fraud thing right now either, but my trust in polls in some of these places is, and by polls, I don't mean the opinion polls. I mean the actual
Yeah, the
election
actual
polls.
voting polls. Yeah.
It is
Well, see, here's the
less than great.
yeah, here is the thing about that. I have no doubt. And by the way, this sort of election cheating is, I don't know why we think we have such pristine elections in this
Yeah, I don't
country.
know.
Richard Nixon won the 1960 presidential election.
Right.
He knew it. A lot of people knew it. He didn't contest it because he thought it would be bad for the country if
Yep.
he, sent an avalanche of lawyers into Illinois to take a closer look at what happened in Cook County, let's say, because he wins Illinois, he wins the election.
Right.
And I think it's pretty much black letter history at this point that Richard Daley won that election for John Kennedy and didn't do so fairly. We have this idea that we have this incorruptible election system. We just don't. And it hasn't been incorruptible for years. It has been fortunate in many cases that the candidates who won well past the margin of possible fraud.
Right.
George W. Bush in 2004, Barack Obama in 2012 and 2008. So it happens.
2012 was a little more iffy, but yeah.
Maybe, but it wasn't close enough to. I mean, at the end of the day, what happened at the polls largely matched what happened uh, in.
Yeah, that's when we decided to start believing the polls, right?
Yeah, and that turned out to be a huge mistake.
Of course, there was the whole,
But look, there was no
you know,
way. There was no
that.
way Barack Obama was going to lose in 2008. That just wasn't going to
No,
happen.
it was. I mean, that was a cakewalk. Everybody knew it, and you know what?
And
Everybody
look, Bill
acquiesced to
Clinton
it. Like,
wasn't going
fine.
to. Bill Clinton wasn't going to lose in 2000, in 1996.
No,
Bob Dole
there was no
had
way.
no chance.
No.
But yeah, and of course, whenever you have all of these election supervisors who refuse, even when asked by their state legislatures to clean up voter rolls or do all of the other things, almost anything for electoral integrity is just rejected outright, certainly in states run by Democrats. I mean, I can only think of one reason why that would be true. Now, the problem is we don't know what the level of cheating is. We don't know how it's being done.
Well, there's no way to determine it really either, because once a vote's cast, it's cast.
Exactly.
You can't go back and look under the hood at that point.
I mean, in Arizona, in the
Yeah,
20,
Kerry Lake.
no, not Kerry Lake. I'm thinking of the 2020 election.
Oh
Whenever,
yeah, yeah,
whenever they did that audit, right?
right.
And the auditors
Yeah,
went there,
how long did that take
and
too?
it
That
took
took like 2 years.
it took well, it didn't take 2 years, but I mean, it took 6 or 7 months for them to finally get that audit done. And then when they did, they determined it would not have, whatever changes might have been made, would not have affected the outcome of the election. I mean, they're looking at the original ballots. The problem is when you're looking at the original ballots, like here in California, you're looking at little circles drawn on pieces of paper.
Right.
Uh,
You're
how
not looking at who actually put that vote down. Were they a registered voter? Were they a legal voter? Um, did they vote more than once?
Yeah,
You
you have no
know,
idea.
you're just looking at the tabulated votes.
All you have are these ballots, and
Right.
I don't know how you I don't know how you fix that if you don't have a system that really, really does everything it can to ensure electoral integrity. But of course, you can't because just like when Georgia came in with their voter ID law, well, that's just Jim Crow.
Well, obviously.
I mean, despite the fact that, minority participation in elections has risen since that law was put into place, it was Jim Crow. Nobody calls it that now unless they really need to for, to make a political point because, it's obvious that it didn't do what we were warned that it would do.
Right.
But we have a fundamentally broken electoral system. I don't know how to fix that other than, electing people who are really concerned about voter integrity and who are willing to suffer the slings and arrows of outrageous fortune that come their way when they say, okay, well, we're just going to clear off the voter rolls. All the dead people gone. Even that would be an improvement.
Oh, exactly. And we both know the answer. It's the same answer as to, why do those on the left want people streaming across the border? And they basically already told you this. Why is it they want more people to come from out of this country, period, and become voters? Why do they want teens as voters? As young as 16, they want these people voting. They want felons voting. I mean, they are trying to corral an electorate that will put them in a solid majority for generations.
Yeah, and look, I remember after the 2020 election, both of us expressed some doubt about Joe Biden's ability to get 80 million voters.
Yeah.
Or 81, whatever the number
Right,
was.
right.
And
well, we arrived at the same conclusion too. Okay, yeah, I really doubt that, but
how do I
doesn't
prove
matter. Yeah, exactly. And there is no real remedy built into the Constitution or any congressional law. So you got to go with what you have. And once it's certified and ratified at the congressional level, it's over.
Well,
And maybe that's not a bad thing, in that we don't have these prolonged, battles over who actually won. Once it's certified, it's all legal. It's done. Everybody can whine about it or celebrate it however they want next time, but it's going to show up in the next election.
yeah, and one of the things that we've noticed ever since 2000, by the way, and this is been just like clockwork since 2000, especially at the presidential level.
Yeah.
Whoever loses the election just comes back and says, well, it's clearly voter fraud. That election was stolen from me.
Well, I don't think it's whoever. I don't think anybody complained about voter fraud in 2008. There were some complaints in 2012.
Yeah, I think 2008 is the exception that proves the rule, but there certainly was voter fraud claims made by Republicans in 2012, and certainly Democrats in 2000 and 2004, Democrats again in 2016, and then of course Republicans in 2020.
20, right.
So both sides are claiming that there is electoral fraud going on, clearly, when they lose. But still, if both sides are pretty sure that electoral fraud is going on, and let's not forget the Democrats had this whole thing, what was it, 2000 and...
It was like 2018, when they were complaining about Dominion machines and how they can't be trusted and all that stuff.
Yeah, exactly, which is the same thing they said about the Diebold machines in 2004, right?
In 2004.
What do they know that we as regular voters don't know? Because every time
if they unleashed the Kraken, if what's her face had unleashed the Kraken, maybe we'd know.
Yeah, well, I mean,
and that's
the additional.
The proof never ever comes out. There's never any proof.
That's the additional difficulty. Everybody says they have proof. Mike Lindell in his Cyber Summit, if you'll remember, had absolute incontrovertible proof of votes being changed over the internet that he was going to present at the summit. Well, that was 2 years ago. He didn't present it then, and he hasn't presented it since.
No. And it'd be fascinating if he could have done that.
Yeah, it would be fascinating if somebody could have proof. And the problem with the whole Linwood, Rudy Giuliani cabal there, and the release, the Kraken.
She was like, she was aces. She was literally one of the top-notch political attorneys for the most part in the country, and now she's like fallen off the face of the planet. Linwood was kind of riding a wave off of defending the
but I mean, they had allegations, but they had no proof that any of those allegations were true. It was just stories, and it doesn't matter which side is claiming it, whether it's Hillary Clinton claiming that this was all a Russian disinformation op that helped Trump win because some Meemaw in Coral Gables, Florida wrote a Facebook post. Okay, sure. But we can never get to the bottom of these claims. We haven't gotten to the bottom of any of these claims since 2000. And look, in 2000, you had at least in Florida, you had a pretty good shot at a voter fraud claim, I should think. Although Florida's cleaned up their elections since then, clearly.
Go Jeb.
I just don't. I would love to have the evidence that we could actually put out in front of the American people to say, look, this is what we can expect in terms of fraud. And these
absolutely.
And these are the areas where
there are people
fraud.
who do that. There's Christian, what's his face, and like Hans von Spassky, who Christian, he writes for PJ Media all the time. And he used to be part of, was the FEC or whoever the enforcement arm of the FEC is. I can't remember.
Yeah, it's the Federal Election Commission's Hans von Spassky, and the other guy's name
Yeah, yeah. But
eludes me at the
they
moment too.
they've done a lot of work on this, and they've gathered a lot of info. Um, it's just nearly impossible to get any actual interest amongst the prosecutors. And there's no private attorney general statute that would allow you to bring these types of suits on your own.
And plus, what you mentioned, look, we have this election on the second Tuesday in November. By December 16th, so
Put up or
basically
shut up.
6 weeks, we have the electors meeting and casting their ballots. I mean, say what you want about the certification that happens in early
In
January
January. Yeah.
in Congress. That doesn't really matter.
It's formality.
The drop dead date is December 16th.
Right.
And you've got basically 6 weeks from the end of an election to December 16th to come up with whatever claim you might want to come up with. You're right, there's no constitutional or legislative mechanism that has been put forward that would allow you to challenge an election's result in a particular state. Certainly not that you could do in such a timely manner, because once those
Well,
electors met and those electors vote, we all have this idea that we go to the polls and we elect the president. That's not how it works. The people who
right.
go to the polls and elect the president are the people who meet in the state capitol on the 16th of December, basically, and cast
Yeah,
their
you're
ballots.
electing a slate of electors who actually go to do the work for you.
Exactly. Um, that's just not enough. That's just not enough time. Now, the weird thing about the 2020 election happening during COVID, so there was just this vast increase in mail in and drop box and other methods of voting that were different than any we had ever tried before. Um, the time to have those arguments was prior to the second Tuesday in November. Was as soon
Yeah.
as these states said we're going to do it this way to treaty trot into federal court or, well, state court, depending on how it came about, and just say, no, this is not a legal method. And
To be
certainly, I
fair,
think that
though,
that would have been effective in some states where the election officials just basically took state law, threw it away, and came up with their own election process.
well, and thing is that happened in Pennsylvania, it happened in Wisconsin, it happened in Michigan, and much later, the courts came down and said, "Oh yeah, that was totally illegal. You can't do that anymore." And you're right, and I agree with all the criticism. I've heard this a lot from um, both the right and the left, that the time to really have been challenging some of this stuff was well prior to election day, or even the opening of election season for those places that have mail-in ballots. That's absolutely true, and there should have been some prescience on the part of Republican campaign lawyers and whatnot. But the rules got changed so quickly. Deadlines get extended. Uh, Things that are already set in law were just completely ignored, overridden, cast aside. There were so many things that went awry, and the same excuse, well, it's COVID. We have an emergency situation, so we have to do what's best for the people and their health and safety. And that turned out to be very hard to challenge. The ones that were successfully challenged all received verdicts long after any of these constitutional, prerequisite dates, December 16th or 18th, whatever it is. And plus the courts were not, they couldn't find a remedy that they could grant in order to rectify this harm. And that's a kind of a big deal in jurisprudence is, okay, we agree that, as a court, you were wronged, but what remedy can we fashion that would fix that?
Yeah, I
And
mean,
when
the
running up
Donald,
against all these time limits and stuff, what we can't go back in time. We can't have a whole new vote.
yeah, that was Donald Trump's thing. Well, let's just have a new election. No, sorry, we had the
It's not
election.
even possible. It's not even logistically possible. You can't. You can't. All the stuff that goes in, and I know this. It seems like it should be a lot easier than this, but it's not, because there are a lot of safety protocols and
for
integrity protocols
for
and
all the
whatever.
good they do. Sure.
Yeah. But they've got to follow all this stuff, and it has to be printed up. Some states it has to be printed up in like what's in California, like 60 different languages. All these ballots have to be printed up in.
Yeah.
That takes time. Then you got to get it printed up correctly. They have to be checked. You have to get them to all the polling places. You have to have poll workers in place. You have to have chain of custody people in place. I mean, it's a massive organization. You can't just turn around and do that again in 30 days. That's just never going to happen. So it's not a remedy that's available. And maybe there should be some sort of remedy available like that. I don't know. But I think, at least for federal elections, it's going to require a constitutional amendment I don't think
Yeah.
Congress is empowered to do anything about that.
No, because the Constitution specifies the drop dead dates. It is predicated on the idea that the election will be held fairly.
Right.
And for all of the genius of our founders who thought that human beings were pretty much reprobates and needed to have, fairly free bounds within specified limits, but those specified limits were hard and fast. This just seems to be a big blind spot of theirs. That we'll have this election, and heck, in 6 weeks we'll all know who the winner is, and
I don't think they could
everything will
envision
be
a
fine.
country of 300 million people.
Well, that's the other thing. There's just
Yeah, I mean,
it's way large. It's too large of a country
a lot
to
of these things just aren't scalable uh, to that degree, unfortunately. Um, but whatever. I mean, it is what it is. It has to be worked on. There has to be solutions presented, but it does have to comport with the Constitution. And I'm getting sick. So just like, okay, I'm switching gears a little bit, but this parental Bill of Rights in the House that was just passed, fully behind it. I agree with everything that is said in that piece of legislation.
I agree with what's said in the piece of legislation. It's not federal legislation.
I don't understand on what constitutional premise think they have the authority to do this.
Oh, so we do
and
agree
again,
then.
I'm a big fan of the words that are said there, and I'm a big fan of the rights that should be recognized.
Yes, that's a piece of legislation that should be introduced into every one of the 50 states.
Exactly. That's exactly right. I don't even understand. It's like the whole abortion thing. I mean, Lindsey Graham, what a freaking moron. And he's not a moron. That's what bothers me. When he introduced that abortion bill, right before the 2022 congressional elections, Lindsay, I know you're a smart enough person to understand that what the Supreme Court just said is this is not a federal issue. The federal Constitution does not reach this level of control. Congress has no ability to say, hide your hair about it. This is something for the states. Well, let's just make a federal abortion ban. No. Duh. And this is the same thing. It's a politically popular issue. I get it. But it doesn't.
It's red meat for the rubes.
Federal mandate.
It's red meat for the rubes and hayseeds.
That's all it is. And that's the kind of thing that I can't stand.
It's not going to pass the Senate. And if it's not going to pass the Senate. And if it does, the president's not going to sign it into law. It's going nowhere.
Well, exactly. So that's all it is. Like you said, it's red meat for the rubes and hayseeds. But you know what else it does? And I think this is what pisses me off the most. It gives some sort of imprimatur to the idea that Congress has this power in the first place.
Exactly.
And so then people start thinking, well, why can't they make this law? Why can't they do that? And when you give them the idea that we could have made this law without explaining, well, yeah, it was probably a little beyond our purview, like actually entirely beyond our purview.
Because
You end up
because
creating these national culture wars that don't need to happen.
because the second that you go up and you say, like the Republicans did, we need to have this Parents' Bill of Rights for education. Well, when the Democrats come back and do something similar but opposite, and you
Right,
stand up in opposition, they'll just look at you and say, well, you better not make a constitutional argument about this because you voted against it. It's like,
right.
what's her name from Colorado, Lauren Boebert,
Over, yeah.
who just came out and said, well, there shouldn't even be a Department of Education. Yes, you're right. Probably not for the reason that you think. But yes, education is not a federal government responsibility. There
No,
should not have been a Department of Education, which, by the way, did not exist prior to 1979.
right.
It was the Department of Health, Education, and Welfare, and the E part of HEW shouldn't have existed then either.
Well, I'm not even sure
But
any of it should,
but
should
fine.
exist. Department of Health, I mean, it doesn't even, I'm not sure where the constitutional, anyway,
But fine,
getting
you
back to
can't stand up in Congress on Wednesday and vote for this Parents' Bill of Rights, and then come out on Thursday and talk about how the Department of Education basically has no constitutional authority. Um, One or the other of those things cannot be something you believe.
right. Or you don't understand.
Yeah, well, in her case, I would presume that she doesn't understand, but still.
Oh, just because she's pretty, we don't need to hate on her.
No, it has nothing to do with whether she's pretty, but, how sharp a knife compared to the other knives in the drawer if I was looking for something to go carving. Would I
Well,
pick
some of
the
those
would
knives
I
are
pick the
Maxine Waters and
would I pick the Bobert Ginsu?
Sheila Jackson Lee.
Yeah, well, I wouldn't pick the Sheila Jackson Lee Ginsu either. There's
I'm
there's a
cutting
whole
my
bunch
arm off.
there's a whole bunch of knives in that drawer that I really wouldn't want to reach for.
Sheila Jackson Lee is still fighting slavery today. You know,
I still there is still no front runner who can beat Hank Johnson.
well, Cynthia McKinney was the only.
Okay, look, I don't know that Cynthia McKinney was stupid. She was just crazy.
Yeah, I mean, Hank Johnson is genuinely stupid. Yes, um,
I
and
mean, I'm
he
sure
might be the dumbest in Congress.
I mean, I'm
I'm
sure
not
he's
sure.
got a good heart and everything, and I'm sure he's a fine fella, but
He really cared about those people on
on
Guam.
Guam, well, get too many people on an island, it might just capsize.
It was the way he explained it too, with like all the detail. Well,
Well, it took him 5 minutes to get to the point because he had all of this scientific background that he felt that he had to expound to the chief of naval operations.
and that poor general was like, "We
Oh,
don't
well,
anticipate
Congressman, that's
that."
not something we really anticipate happening because islands are the tops of mountains. But I mean, yeah,
That really was.
that really has to take the cake. I really wish that I could find a high def version of that. Everything that I find on YouTube is, this old, because it was a long time ago. So it's all this old low res
Hey,
video.
another thing has changed. We didn't have high def back then.
Yeah, I would love to find a full HD video of that. Heck, something shot in 35 millimeter. That would be perfect.
Like the Zapruder film. Back and tipped over.
Back and to the left. Back and to the left. Yeah, I just don't know what we're going to do about elections. I think that, not a fan of Donald Trump, but when he talks about election fraud, I think he's probably right. Was it enough to put Joe Biden over the top? I don't know. Because again, Trump barely won in 2016, going up against one of the most unpopular politicians in modern American history. a woman whose negatives have been hovering at 50% since the 1990s.
The
So,
problem was that
and he
they,
barely pulled that one out. I mean, just barely squeaked it by.
but think
Um,
about how confident Democrats were that year. How they were just absolutely certain, 99% chance she's going to win.
oh, yeah, I remember sitting there watching that New York Times 98% probability that Hillary Clinton will win and just watching that needle slowly drift off to the
I'm
left as
not
the
gonna
night went
lie.
on.
I sometimes go back and watch that on YouTube.
Oh, sure. I mean, that was
That's a gift that keeps on giving.
that was great, but he barely pulled that one out.
Yeah, and honestly, he may have been the only one that could have beat Hillary Clinton. Oddly enough, Jeb would not have beaten her, even though there would have been a lot of people vote. And let's face it, I think today's electorate, we mostly vote against the other side than we do for. I think the vast majority of voters are voting against the other side than voting for an actual leader. They're willing to stomach whoever ends up winning as long as it's not that person that I voted against. Hillary Clinton is a great example. I think she engenders so much distrust, so much hate, that people were super motivated to vote against her.
Yeah,
Um,
again, her negatives have been in the high 40s to low 50s since 1992.
yeah,
I mean, she was
well,
deeply unpopular at a time when her husband was the most popular president in American history.
yeah. And the more shit she got away with, after Benghazi, uh, her emails. What about her emails?
Yeah, I
Um,
mean, I don't know. See, what you said is that only Trump could have beaten her. That she probably would have beat Jeb. I don't know that that's true. I don't know that any regular Republican. I think that would have been because we're a 50-50 country anyway. I think it would have been a close race no matter who ran against her, but I wouldn't have assumed that only Donald Trump could have beaten her. I think that
I don't think Jeb
almost
could have
any
pulled
good,
out the people. I,
well,
I
maybe, but
mean,
if you're going to vote against Hillary Clinton, you're going to vote against Hillary Clinton. And
but
so,
what if you don't vote at all? And that was the big problem. Because remember, we talked about this in the months leading up to the 2016 election about the Rust Belt, and all these forgotten people, and how much time and effort Trump concentrated in those areas. He knew something. Actually, I guess Steve Bannon knew something that obviously the Clinton campaign, they never made it to Wisconsin, right? Famously.
didn't make it
Um,
to Philly until the Monday before the election,
right.
or Sunday,
And
rather.
Trump went to where the troubled people were. And he spoke to their populism. He spoke to their belief in America. He spoke to the fact that they've been abandoned. No, not even any of the other Republican candidates were talking about anything like that.
Yeah, but interestingly enough, that's not what he's talking about now. What he's
No,
talking about now is how the same thing that
he's
I
he
said.
is fundamentally a different candidate now.
Yeah, he's talking about how the entire government is corrupt. Everything is turned against, and he
And
uses himself as
I don't disagree with
yeah.
him
I
on
I
that.
don't disagree
It's
with
just
him.
I'm not sure that putting him in charge is gonna.
Well,
All
I
he's
don't.
gonna do is blow it all up. I mean,
Yeah, I
okay,
don't. I don't think he's going to fix it because he didn't
he
seem to be
can't. He
capable of
doesn't
fixing
have
it.
that ability.
But it's not the same message that he's giving out now. Now, will he still win the nomination? I think he's got a very good shot of doing so. Again, the people who love him. And they will say, it's really interesting when you're on Twitter and you run across these people like Alec Bruzewitz, who, by the way, wasn't a big Trump fan 6 months ago, but apparently is now. but that could be because Trump is paying him. But all of these people who are pro-Trump people, who, I mean, Trump will say things that are just absolutely untrue. He'll say things about his own record that never happened. It was Donald Trump, in fact, who was arguing against Brian Kemp opening up Georgia. We have the transcript of the phone call where Brian Kemp said, with all due respect, Mr. President, my responsibility is the people of Georgia, and I have to do what's best with them.
I'm not even a big Brian Kemp fan, but
yeah, and Trump was the guy who
Kemp did the right thing. Trump threw him under the bus, and Kemp kept doing the right thing. Kemp was absolutely in the right. Trump was playing politics. He didn't understand. I don't blame him. I mean, he didn't understand, and he was worried about keeping people safe, and he absolutely threw Kemp under the bus. I mean, I don't think that needs to be a real judgment call one way or the other.
Yeah, but at the same
time,
I
do think that Kemp has not gotten enough credit for that.
Yeah, but look, this isn't about Kemp. This is about the people who, when Trump says, I was against the lockdowns. No, you weren't.
Well, that's right. He was not.
We know that you weren't because you criticized Republican governors who said, I'm sorry, the lockdown has gone too far. I can't watch
and that's what's so odd about him saying that about DeSantis. He and his cronies. It comes a lot from his cronies.
Yeah.
The what's her hell, Laura Loomers and those types saying, "Oh, but you locked down Florida." Well, every state was locked down. Which ones emerged first? I mean, literally every state was shut down. There were no states that did not get shut down.
And by the way, I sat and watched you in the Oval Office telling us that you were going to have everything shut down.
Right.
Well, not the Oval Office, the press room, but still.
Whatever. So I mean, we know this happened. This isn't ancient history.
Yeah, and yet whenever that gets retold now, 3 years later on Twitter, the story is that Donald Trump never wanted these lockdowns. This was all forced on him, and he wanted the lockdowns released. Well,
it actually is a really bad play on his part because it shows the absolute weakness that he had. He didn't have the ability to stand up to his cabinet, his administrators. He didn't have the ability to tell them no. And some of that's because he's a big germaphobe. And so he's like, can we just get some stuff inside the chest?
Yeah, well, but I'm watching history being revised again for events that occurred in living memory and people saying things that literally did not happen in support of Donald Trump. Now, I think that also goes back to my point that whenever he walks into the primary, those are the same people that will be incapable of preventing themselves from rushing out to the polls. And I don't know that we pull levers anymore, but whatever the analog is of pulling the lever, they're going to be pulling the lever for Donald Trump.
Well, as Daniel Tasha said, that that's why we shouldn't let midgets vote. They're jumping up, pulling those levers. They don't know who they're voting for.
Well, people think they do know who they're voting for with Donald Trump, but I don't know.
Well, I mean, everybody thinks they know who they're voting for or what the principles and pieties that they're voting for if they go to vote.
But the interesting
how many of them actually know? I doubt very few.
But the interesting thing about the 2020 election, if we go back to the election fraud stuff, okay, I get you, and yet at the same time that Joe Biden won that election, the Democrats had their majority in the House narrowed substantially. And look, we can talk about those 2 Senate seats in Georgia, which I would argue that Donald Trump lost. He basically told people, don't go vote in the January runoff.
He actively lost those seats.
Just don't go vote. They're just going to steal your votes from you. Okay, but if the question, which always has to be asked, if the election was stolen from you, which again, I have no evidence to one way or the other. But if the election was stolen from you, then why did Democrats do worse in that election? Why did their majority narrow to, I believe it was 5 seats? I mean, they came within an
Biden
ace.
had no coattails
No,
whatsoever.
they came within an ace of losing the House. And there were a number of
Yep.
state level races where they just got blown
They
out.
flipped.
Okay.
Yep.
Then you have to explain, if all that cheating went on to take the election away from you, why didn't it affect any other candidate? I mean, I suppose it's possible that somebody just, changed votes for Donald Trump to Joe Biden. I guess it might have happened, and just left the rest of the ballot
So who are
unchanged.
you asking this question to?
Well, I'm asking it to Donald Trump, actually. If
So
the
not
election was,
to
if
wait a minute, hold on,
well, if the
because it
election,
seems like that.
if the election was stolen from you, then why did everybody else under you in all these House races and Senate races and these gubernatorial races, why did they do well and you didn't? So is
Well, but
this a
that's what I mean. Shouldn't that be a question posed to the Biden supporters? Why didn't you vote Democrat down the line? Why did you also vote predominantly for Republicans at every other level?
well, because ticket splitting is a very well known
It's
electoral.
no, it's not. I mean, it does happen, but not in presidential elections. It is very, very. Matter of fact, I can't even think of the last time it happened where a president who got 81 million votes
Had
couldn't
no
carry
coattails.
anybody else across the line.
Yeah, well,
I don't know, man. I think you're trying to prove too much.
okay, well, I can argue it. We can argue it one way or the other. The problem is, I don't have a lot of confidence in our electoral system and in its
Yeah, and
integrity.
I think increasingly people don't. And like you said, when someone like Donald Trump comes out in the Georgia, runoffs or whatever those were, and then says, "No, don't even bother showing up. They're just going to cheat you. Don't even participate." It's like, what the fuck are you doing? Like, you stand a better chance of being on better footing
Yeah,
next time around,
the
or even
argument.
with whatever you're pursuing now, if you would have get some Senate Republicans in there.
Yeah, the argument is they're cheating. You have to show up in levels large enough. And by the way, this is something Rush Limbaugh used to say on his show.
Right.
Show up in with so many people that you go beyond the measure of fraud.
Right. That's
If
something that Glenn
if
Reynolds
yeah,
says.
if
That's
enough of you
something
show up, if you beat the margin of
that
fraud, there's
Schlichter
nothing they can
says.
do.
I mean, literally every conservative, libertarianish. Um, I mean, I know you're partial to your conservative side there, conservative commentator, but
Yeah,
there's some other people out there that also think that let's get enough people out there. Let's spoil the vote by having more people show up. And that's the right answer. That's absolutely the right answer.
yeah. The absolutely wrong answer is don't show up. It's all going to be stolen from you. Which, by the way, we could go for another freaking 30 minutes on how perceived electoral fraud just sends people away from the polls completely and ruins your elections. But we've already been doing this for an hour and 40